Hello everyone, and welcome to yet another Poor Verdict Day thingamajig. Before I begin, I would like to say probably gonna start working on some Warframe videos soon because I play a lot of Warframe and there's a lot of things I could say about Warframe. So don't be surprised if you see some of that. And I don't even remember what the rest of the thing I was gonna say was. Regardless, I'm gonna talk about UNACs today, specifically my first UNAC. And this is my second time recording, but whatever. So this is my first UNAC. It's a big bulky piece of thing. All it does is run at people and shoot. That's all it needs to do. It's what it's good at. It does it pretty well. So, we're going to look at the frame parts first, because those are the main things that allow it to do what it does. All of the parts are built for defense and AP. Defense, AP. Defense, AP. Defense, AP. So lots and lots of defense and AP, which results in fairly high defenses across the board. Enough to block out missiles before impact, or missiles before they stun you, but they're not going to stun this AC because the recoil resistance is high enough. Although if they're paired with a laser, then they'll stun, they'll do lots of damage anyway. So high enough to block missiles on their own, high enough to block most of the weaker battle rifles and other CE weapons, a lot of missiles and stuff like that too, and high enough to block all pulse guns. So basically I wanted to deal with a lot of the like burst damage weapons that people would usually use to deal with this at either extreme long range or extreme short range, forcing you to kind of play at the mid range with it, which is where it does best. So, like I said, each of the parts is built for raw bulk, lots of defense, lots of health. So this Scarlet Head with the retrofit, it just gets increased armor and health at the cost of weight, but that doesn't really matter that much since this thing is a pretty bulky AC anyway. It's not supposed to be going anywhere. I put the Monoceros core on it primarily because the Monoceros core looks amazing, but also because the Monoceros core gives me the right balances of, or it gives me enough defense while also giving me really high AP. Because 17,000 AP on one part is kind of absurd. Next up, the arms. I picked these because they're double slot, they're bulky, they have a lot of armor, they fit the AC. The double slot I'll talk about in a little bit. The legs, I chose these because they have really high defenses. Not because of their AP as much, although they do have really high AP. I just chose them because their defenses are high enough to let me get the balance of defenses that I want, which lets me block out missiles, rifles, pulse guns, all of the things. If I were to go for a different one, I could block out more battle rifles, but the battle rifles isn't really that big of a deal. So, yes, I didn't really feel it was worth it. So then, now I can talk about the internals, and then finally I'll talk about the weapons. Internals, I picked this FCS because it's basically just a big wide FCS with a long enough range to let the AC fight pretty effectively without having to worry about turning over time. Because this AC's turning performance is pretty crap. It's like, yeah, it's about the same as a tank. So then, that's why I chose this FCS. It's really big, so that means the UNAC doesn't have to try very hard to keep an AC in its sights, which is primarily important for the Gatling guns. Heat howitzer doesn't really need to lock on at all. The Gatling gun is, and the battle rifle is just there to spam, really. So I could easily replace that battle rifle with like a heat machine gun. I just haven't yet because of reasons. I think because of the recoil resistance, but whatever. This generator, I picked it because it's one of the best generators for UNACs to use because they're really bad at managing energy. That's basically the gist of it. They're really bad at managing energy, but they are very good at boosting and perfecting their boosts. So they move with boost very effectively without needing to use a lot of energy at one time, like a human might. I picked this because it's a fairly efficient booster and it works fairly well as a generator, so reasons. Recon, I picked that because if I'm going to be operating behind this UNAC, like as an operator, not like as in like standing behind it, but if I'm playing as an operator, then these recons will let me see a fairly wide area wherever the UNAC is located, and also lets me know if something's coming up from behind it. That way I can properly move it out of the way or change the things it needs to focus on. So that's the main reason I chose those. You can really realistically go with any recon, although I wouldn't recommend tracking type recons on UNACs because they don't cover as much space as the other type of recons do. And when you're operating, you want to see as much of the map at one time as you possibly can because you can't really look around since you're not on the field. Now I can talk about the weapons. So the Gatling guns, I picked them because they're fairly accurate. They got tons of ammo, and you can just shoot at them you can just shoot at people all day, and you'll do pretty decent amounts of damage with them. They're really reliable that way, so that's why I picked them. Now, the shoulders, I picked bomb dispensers because bomb dispensers are hilarious because you spam them literally everywhere, and they just float in the air and turn they turn the area into a literal minefield, and so it makes it very difficult for lightweights to move around without taking a lot of additional damage from the mines. You can obviously ignore them if you're a heavier unit, or if you just like know what you're doing. Or did I say avoid or ignore? I don't remember. Regardless, you can ignore them pretty easily if you're a heavy unit. You can avoid them pretty easily if you're a light unit. But they're there to throw people off and to mess with what they're doing enough to make them get hit more by the our weapons on the UNAC. The other thing they do is they actually do they kind of, since they come in like clusters, because they fire I think like 4 from each shoulder or something like that. So they come in really big clusters, and when they hit an enemy, they have a tendency to cause a bit of lag, just because like of the sheer amount of explosions that are happening. And so that actually kind of works in this UNAC's favor, because UNAC doesn't give a fuck about lag. Now, I was also going to talk about the tuning on the Gatling guns real quick. 2 power, 1 accuracy is just for power and a little bit of extra muzzle velocity. I could easily go a full power to get more DPS, but I felt like the added muzzle velocity helps a little bit. So, yeah. Now for the back weapons, I picked this heat howitzer because there's a lot of damage, and UNACs are actually fairly proficient with heat howitzers. They're fairly proficient with most weapons that don't require a lock-on, actually. And the battle rifle I put it on there just to spam the shit out of it, and primarily to add more DPS to like a slow enemy that is moving around a lot, like an enemy heavy bipedal or an enemy UNAC. I could easily put a heat machine gun here, and that would probably be the smarter choice, but I didn't feel like doing that. So now that we've looked at all of the parts, I mean, I guess we can talk about alternates for a little bit. There's not really a lot of alternates I would do on the frame parts, because I feel like this frame has a really good balance of defense and health, which is what I wanted from it. If I were to reduce the load by, say, changing the battle rifle up for something lighter like a heat machine gun, I could probably swap out like the generator for a heavier one, maybe something else. But really, there's no real reason to change many of the parts on this AC outside of maybe the battle rifle. So then onward into the operation, or the programming of this UNAC. So this is a UNAC with 2 sets of operations. So this is the first operation, and then over here is the second operation. So this is based on the enemy's defense type, and this is just the default. So this controls movement. Move close to the left, move close to the right. Not a lot of complications there. Right here, these are 2 overlapping. These control the right arm, and this controls the left arm. So the right arm ones, these are 2 overlapping weapons, or 2 overlapping weapon chips that will basically make the UNAC fire its Gatling gun at varying ranges. So if I don't have 2 chips, then there'll be certain ranges that it won't fire at. So I want to make sure it's firing its Gatling guns at all times. Same over here. 2 different chips to ensure that it's firing at all times. This is the short range chip. This is the short range chip, medium range chip. That's what I use them for. I don't remember what I did for the customizations on these, but yeah, I just made sure that the minimum maximum range is really high. And the attack computation, I turned it way down just to make sure it's attacking all the time. I want it to be firing its guns at all times because it has tons of ammo to fire them, so it might as well. This one right here. This is the spam all of the bombs ever button. That's what it's for. Surprisingly, with the way it's configured, it actually hits people with bombs directly a fair bit. But yeah. You've seen me fight this UNAC a couple times when I'm testing against it. These are my 3 chips for controlling what the UNAC sees and what the UNAC can't see. If I change the display by pressing triangle, you can see like overlays of what each of the chips does. One of them is a little circle, is a small circle, a 360-degree like area of awareness around the UNAC, so they can see if someone tries to sneak up on it. It's not entirely effective, but it is useful for tracking someone who's trying to circle around you. Next is a slightly wider one, or a bigger but also not as wide one that covers a fairly wide area. That's for tracking people directly to the sides. And then the very large one is just for tracking people in general and making sure they don't get away. That would be this one right here in these. So this is the generic one, I think. This is more of like the middle range one, and this is the Oh no, this okay. Oh no, I can just look at these right here. So I forgot the difference. There's non-penetration and then penetration. So the biggest one right here is the non-penetration, which has the biggest range and like a fairly wide angle. So this is just designed for, you know, keeping track of what's going on the battlefield. That's the big blue one, or the big like light blue one that you see. It's going way off the screen in the little diagram of it. Now the range is 450, which is really huge. That's basically just to follow enemies that try to run away. That's all it's for. I'm pretty sure I modified it to increase the. Yeah, I modified it to increase the range and the angle. Right here, range and angle, right? You can't really do anything with the angle of this one because it's already max. It's 360 degrees. If you increase the angle beyond that, I don't know what happens. But I increased the range on that one to make it more useful. But essentially, penetration. So like I said earlier, the non-penetration, it's just for keeping track of what's going on. Penetration is special because it lets you see enemies that are behind cover, and so that way, like, say you're in an area that's very crowded and there's a lot of cover, the unit can still keep track of what's going on around it, even if it can't get a direct line of sight on what's happening. Same for this one. This one's just bigger and wider, but we're bigger and not 360 degrees. Now this right here, this one is a targeting chip. So right here I only have one targeting chip because I only need one targeting chip. And so essentially all it's going to be focused on is what's closer. If two guys are approaching the UNAC from different angles and one of them's closer to the other one, then it'll attack the one that's closer. That's all there is to it. That's really all it really needs to do. It's a very simple UNAC, so yeah. These are special action chips. Actually no, these are special action chips over here. These are the evasion chips. So it has two chips. This one is the one that makes it drop out of the air if it's in the air and it's taking a lot of damage. This is the one that makes it jump into the air. That's all it does. So basically I'm just telling it jump a lot into the air, and then if you get shot at, drop down again. Right here, these are the special evasion chips, or special movement chips. They're not evasion chips technically. This one makes it wall jump. This one makes it use high boost, and this one makes it use a glide boost. Although the glide boost is the least effective due to the very low capacity of the generator. So which is why I told it primarily to focus on the wall jumps. But essentially how these chips work is that they cycle, and so basically what it's going to do, not this one, but because those are controlled by how much damage you're taking and stuff like that. But what these chips do is they cycle, so they have a duration, right? And so right here you see they also have probability. So the first one's going to happen 80% of the time, the second one's going to have 50%, and the third one's going to have 30%. And what that means is essentially it's going to roll dice, essentially, and then it's going to figure out which one it wants to do. And it's going to pick them all randomly. This is the least common one, so that's why it's I picked that one as the least common one because it's going to be the least effective. But the most common one is going to be the wall jumps. And so right here, if it rolls the wall jump, then it's going to do wall jumping, nothing but wall jumping for 8 seconds. Or in other words, it's only going to do wall jumping out of these 3 chips for 8 seconds. And it's going to try to match the parameters on the wall jumping chip so it can get close. Right here, if it rolls a high boost, then it's going to go into the high boost for 1 second, and then it's done. And right here, it's going to glide boost for 8 seconds, and then it's done. Now these right here, these are more special actions. These are special movements and special actions. I think this controls, this controls recons. Over here, this controls scan mode, and this one controls, this controls the tackle, the boost charge. This is a really nice one to have. So these are very special, these are very crazy, weird chips. These don't have a probability, these are just all running at the same time all the time. So this one just tells you how often you want to use recons. So once every 10 seconds is pretty good for spamming the hover type recons. That's why I went with that. This controls scan mode, and so essentially what that means is that if the enemy is outside of range, so you have 4 scan mode range, scan mode activation, scan mode deactivation. 4 scan mode range. When the enemy is outside of that range, you're going to go into scan mode no matter what. If there's no enemies within that range, you're always going to be in scan mode. This is good for like enemies for ACs that have fairly short range weapons, and you want to force them to scan mode so that way they can move more quickly, or so that way they have more energy to burn while they approach someone. Now the scan mode activation, I set it to 0 because I don't want this thing to ever go into scan mode unless it absolutely needs to, and then once it hits scan mode, it's going to stay in scan mode until it gets to 40. So so we'll say it bottoms out in Shinra. It's gonna go into scan mode for a second to get up to 40 energy again, and then it's gonna go resume combat. Now this is the boost charge chip. This just controls like at what angle, what distance, whatever it's gonna do its boost charge. Essentially, I told it if it has more than 30 energy, it's within 25 unit. If it's within 25 meters of the enemy, it has more than 30 energy, and yeah, basically if it's close enough to the enemy, and it also has enough energy, it will do the thing where it kicks people. The reaction performance, I think that just makes it more likely to land the kick by timing it better. Whereas everything else is kind of unimportant. I don't remember what the execution area is. Let's check that. Oh, that's the angle. Okay, so that's what that was. So yeah, that just controls the angle. I made the angle slightly wide, that way it tries to tackle people that are fairly close to it and also are moving. So yeah, it doesn't always kick. It doesn't kick as well as my tanks do, but it does kick. And so now we're back onto the movement chips. So we've gone full circle, literally a full circle. You can see the way the circle works here. Now this chip is this second operation is pretty much exactly the same except for a few differences. The main difference obviously is that it is controlling the weapons. And so what this one does is when the CE of the enemy target, or when the CE of the thing is trying to shoot at is less than 2000, it's going to switch to its CE based weapons. That's what it's going to do. So if and also you can set it to target specific leg types, but I think that's too specific to really be worth using. Unless you want a UNAC to really only go after one thing, I think that's too specific. So right here, this is the same. Approach from the left, approach from the right. Now these are different, and I think these are pretty much the same, but they're slightly different. This is the same. This is the same. Pretty much all of these chips, except for the weapon chips, are the same. And that's just because it's using different weapons. I have it behave the exact same way, regardless of the weapons it's using. So right here, this is the right bay unit. And if I change the display, you can see... Oh. There you go. So the right bay unit is the howitzer. So I'm using a howitzer chip for an howitzer. That's all there is to it. So this is going to use a howitzer within 150 meters. That's essentially all there is to it. Excuse me. I set the angles of the cone of fire basically for 45 degrees and 45 degrees, which is a fairly reasonable angle for it to be firing at. If you make the angle wider, it'll fire when the enemy is not at the center of the screen. If you make the angle smaller, it will only fire when the enemy is at the center of the screen. But you have to make it wide enough, because otherwise the UNAC won't respond quickly enough to actually hit something. So yeah. FCS malfunction basically just means if someone flash rockets it, it's going to continue firing. It's not really a huge deal since the howitzer anyway, so... This right here, this controls the Gatling gun. So if someone gets way out of range, so if say I'm fighting a tetrapod who's floating 300 meters away, or not 300, maybe 250 meters away, like 225, whatever. So something like right on the edge of the range of this thing. Actually, not a tetrapod. I'd be fighting a lightweight. It has to be something with less CE. So I'd be say I'm fighting like a lightweight who's just like floating way out of range, like a sniper. Essentially, at that point, I would unequip the howitzer and switch back to the Gatling gun to spam Gatling gun everywhere. That's pretty much how I have it set up. Oh, this is between 150 to 200. I feel like I should add a third chip. Maybe I should. Who knows? Whatever. Also, it's important that these don't overlap. Because see how this one goes from 0 to 150 attack range? So minimum attack 0, maximum attack 150. Minimum install 0, minimum attack, or maximum attack 1, or minimum install 0, maximum install 150. Right here, this is minimum attack 0, maximum attack 200, minimum install, maximum install 150. Wait, why do they have the same install? What? I'm confused. I programmed this UNAC. Why is this like this? This is for the arm, not the bay. Weird. I could have sworn that was for outside of the range. Regardless, it has the option to continue. Oh no, now I remember why I did that. Okay, so the reason I did that is because I wanted to basically use the howitzer until it runs out of ammo, and then when it runs out of ammo, it can still continue to fire the Gatling gun. Even though, because if not, then it would just hold the Gatling gun in its hands and be like, "What is this? What do I do with this?" Just like a real program in a real computer, if you told it to do something it doesn't know how to do, it's gonna be like, "How the fuck do I do this?" So this is the same type of setup, so except here it's a different type of chip. So here I have one chip to control the bay unit and then one chip to control the arm unit. So it's going to fire the bay unit until it runs out of ammo, and then it's going to switch to the Gatling gun, which is the arm unit. Now also, don't be confused. It's always going to say bay unit and arm unit, but that's going off of your initial setup, so it doesn't change. So it's not going to be like, oh, I grabbed my bay unit, now I need to grab my bay unit again. It's going to be like, oh, this weapon is the bay unit, and then it's always going to use that weapon as the bay unit. So, like for example here with the howitzer starts off as a bay unit, so that means whenever I refer to right bay unit, the howitzer the game knows that that's what I'm referring to as the howitzer. And by the way, these howitzer chips are actually really good for using sniper cannons and regular howitzers too. They're interesting chips. They actually work pretty well because they're based off of like the position of the enemy on the screen rather than the determination of your lock-on. So they're kind of interesting. So and obviously over here I have a third operation that's empty just to save space on the cost unit, on the cost bar on the right. You can see there's a bar down there. You've probably been looking at it this entire time. The closer you get to filling up the bar, the less responsive the UNAC becomes. And there's also a maximum amount of chips that you can use. But using all three of even if you use all three of these and you like fill out every chip, I think you can still be under the 50,000 limit. It's just that you have to unlock that limit when you first play the game by dumping money and resources into upgrading the UNAC, which isn't really hard to be honest. Like if you just grind the final boss of the story mode, he drops 1,000,000 credits every time, or 1,000,000 units of gold, and I don't know what it is. I think it's like credits. It's AU, which is gold. So he drops like 1,000,000 gold, and you can farm him over and over again. And every time you kill him, he drops all of the alternate weapons, and you can sell those for 250,000 each. So it's just a lot of easy money. So there's no real reason for you to not have your UNACs maxed out, because you only need to max out your UNAC once, and then it has it maxed out for every UNAC you build ever. So then, I was talking about my UNAC for a while. I hope you enjoyed. Listen to me blab about my UNAC, how I built it, how I programmed it, and I hope you build your own UNACs and we can talk about them. So have a good day, and I'll see you all later. Actually, one last thing. I want to say, like, I used to post these UNACs on forums, and it was such a bitch, like trying to post a UNAC on a forum. I will say that. Like, it just did not work. There was too much data to write down because of all the programming and stuff associated with each UNAC. Whereas with this, I can just upload a video. So then, I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you all later.